is the conjecture that all earlier ages on the Earth were exactly as they are today, calm and peaceful, with no worldwide flood or other great catastrophes. Robert Chambers, 1802 to 1883, was a spiritualist who regularly communicated with the spirits. As a result of his contacts, he wrote the first popular evolution book in all of Britain, called Vestiges of Creation, 1844. It was printed 15 years before Darwin's book, Origin of Species. Charles Lyell, 1797 to 1875. Like Charles Darwin, Lyell inherited great wealth and was able to spend his time theorizing. Lyell published his Principia of Geology in 1830 to 1833, and it became the basis for the modern theory of sedimentary strata, even though 20th century discoveries in radio dating and radiocarbon dating missing strata and overthrust older strata on top of more recent strata have nullified the theory. In order to prove this theory, Lyell was quite willing to misstate the facts. He learned that Niagara Falls had eroded a 7-mile, 11-kilometer channel from Queenston to Ontario, and that it was eroding at about 3 feet a year. So Lyell conveniently changed that to 1 foot 3 a year, which meant that the fall had been flowing for 35,000 years. But Lyell had not told the truth. 3 foot erosion a year at its present rate of flow would only take us back 700 to 9,000 years, and it would be expected that just after the flood, the flow would for a time have greatly increased the erosion rate. Lyell was a close friend of Darwin and urged him to write his book, Origin of Species. Alfred Russel Wallace, in 1823-1913, is considered to be the man who developed the theory which Darwin published. Wallace was deeply involved in Spiritism at the time he formulated the theory in this Turnip paper, which Darwin, with the help of 2 friends, Charles Lyell and Joseph Hooker, pirated and published under his own name. Darwin, a wealthy man, thus obtained the royalties which belonged to Wallace, a poverty-ridden theorist. In 1980, I'll read that again. Alfred Russel Wallace, 1823-1913, is considered to be the man who developed the theory which Darwin published. Wallace was deeply involved in Spiritism at the time he formulated the theory in his Turnip paper, which Darwin, with the help of 2 friends, Charles Lyell and Joseph Hooker, pirated and published under his own name. Darwin, a wealthy man, thus obtained the royalties which belonged to Wallace, a poverty-ridden theorist. In 1980, Arnold C. Brackman, in his book A Delicate Arrangement, established that Darwin plagiarized Wallace material. It was arranged that a paper by Darwin would be read to the Royal Society in London, while Wallace was held back until later. Priorities for the ideas thus having been taken care of, Darwin set to work to prepare his book. In 1875, Wallace came out openly for Spiritism and Marxism, another stepchild of Darwinianism. This was Wallace's theory: species have changed in the past, by which one species descended from another in a manner that we cannot prove today. That is exactly what modern evolution teaches, yet it has no more evidence supporting the theory than Wallace had in 1858 when he devised the theory while in fever. February 1858, while in a delirious fever on the island of Ternate in the Moluccas, Wallace conceived the idea of survival of the fittest as being the method by which species change, but the concept proves nothing. The fittest, which one is that? Is it the one that survived longest? Which one survived longest? The fittest. This is a reasoning in a circle. The phrase says nothing about the evolutionary process, much less proving it. In the first edition of his book, Darwin regarded natural selection and survival of the fittest as different concepts. By the 6th edition of his Origin of the Species, he thought they meant the same thing, but that survival of the fittest was the more accurate. In still later book, Descent of Man, 1871, Darwin ultimately abandoned natural selection as a hopeless mechanism and returned to Lamarckism. Even Darwin recognized the theory was falling to pieces. The supporting evidence just was not there. Charles Darwin, 1809 to 1882, was born into wealth and able to have a life of ease. He took 2 years of medical school at Edinburgh University and then dropped out. It was the only scientific training he ever received. Because he spent the time in bars and with friends, he barely passed his courses. Darwin had no particular purpose in life, and his father planned to get him into a nicely paid job as an Anglican minister. Darwin did not object. but an influential relative got him a position as an unpaid naturalist on a ship planning to sail around the world, the Beagle. The voyage lasted from December 1831 to October 1836. It is of interest that, after engaging in Spiritism, certain men in history have been seized with a deep hatred of God and have then been guided to devise evil teachings that have destroyed large numbers of people, while others have engaged in warfare which have annihilated millions. In connection with this, we think of such non-spiritists as Sigmund Freud and Adolf Hitler. It is not commonly known that Charles Darwin, while a naturalist aboard the Beagle, was initiated into witchcraft in South America by nationals. During horseback travels into the interior, he took part in their ceremonies, and as a result, something happened to him. Upon his return to England, although his health was strangely weakened, he spent the rest of his life working on theories to destroy faith in the Creator. After leaving South America, Darwin was on the Galapagos Island for a few days. While there, he saw some finches which had blown in from South America and adapted to their environment, producing several subspecies. He was certain that this showed cross-species evolution, changing to new species, but they were still finches. This theory about the finches was the primary evidence of evolution he brought back with him to England. Darwin, never a scientist and knowing nothing about the particularities of genetics, then married his first cousin, which resulted in all 7 of his children having physical or mental disorders. One girl died after birth, another at 10. His oldest daughter had prolonged breakdown at 15. Thereof his children became semi-invalids, and his last son was born mentally retarded and died 19 months after his birth. His book Origin of Species was first published in November 1859. The full title On the Origin of the Species by Means of Natural Selection or the Preservation of the Favored Races in the Struggle for Life reveals the viciousness of the underlying concept. This concept led directly to 2 of the worst wars in the history of mankind. In his book, Darwin reasoned from the theory to the facts and provided little evidence for what he had to say. Modern evolutionists are ashamed would cite authorities that he did not mention. He repeatedly said it was only an abstract and a fuller edition would come out later, but although he wrote other books, try as he may, he never could find the proof for his theories, nor one since has found it either. When he did name an authority, it was just an opinion from a letter. Phrases indicating the hypothetical nature of these ideas were frequent. It might have been, maybe, probably, it is conceivable that. A favourite of his was, let us take an imaginary example. Darwin would suggest a possibility and later refer back to it as a fact, as we have already demonstrated previously, etc. Elsewhere, he would suggest a possible series of events, and then conclude by assuming that proved the point. He relied heavily on stories instead of facts. Confusing examples would be given, and he would use spacious and devious arguments and spent much time suggesting possible explanations. In the strata. Later, these changed species traveled over to the Western world to be found in strata. There is new species, so species were changing on the other side of the world, and that was why species in the process of change were not found on the other side. With thinking like this, who needs science? But remember that Charles Darwin never had a day of schooling in the sciences. Here is Darwin's explanation of how one species changed into another. It is a variation of Lamarck's theory of inheritance of acquired characteristics. Nicholas Hutton, Third Evidence of Evolution, 1962, page 138, calling it pangenesis. Darwin said that an organ affected by the environment would respond by giving off particles that he called gemmules. These particles supposedly helped determine hereditary characteristics. The environment would affect an organ, gemmules would drop out of the organ, and the gemmules would travel to the reproductive organs where they would affect the cells. W. Stanfield, Science of Evolution, 1977, page 38. As mentioned earlier, scientists today are ashamed of Darwin's ideas. In his book, Darwin taught that man came from an ape and that the stronger races would, within a century or two, destroy the weaker ones. Modern evolutionists claim that man and ape descend from a common ancestor. After taking part in the witchcraft ceremonies, not only was his mind affected, but his body also. He developed a chronic and incapacitating illness and went to his death under a depression he could not shake. Random House Encyclopedia, 1977, page 768. He frequently commented in his private letters that he recognized there was no evidence for his theory and that it could destroy the morality of the human race. Long before the reader has arrived at this part of my work, a crowd of difficulties will have occurred to him. Some of them are so serious that to this day I can hardly reflect on them without, in some degree, becoming staggered. Charles Darwin, Origin of Species, 1860, page 178, quoted from Harvard Classics, 1909 edition, volume 11. Often a cold shudder has run through me, and I have asked myself whether I may have not devoted myself to fantasy. Charles Darwin, Life and Letters, 1887, volume 2, page 229. The next evolutionist that we're going to be looking at is Thomas Huxley. 1825 1895 was the man Darwin called my bulldog. Darwin was so frail in health that he did not make public appearances, but he remained secluded in the mansion he inherited after being personally converted by Darwin on a visit to Darwin's home. Huxley championed the evolutionary cause with everything he had. In the later part of the 19th century, while Haeckel laboured earnestly on the European continent, Huxley was Darwin's primary advocate in England. The X Club was a secret society in London which worked to further evolutionary thought and suppress scientific opposition to it. It was powerful, for all scientific papers considered by the Royal Society